All of the grappling arts out there, they have moves, but they don't have a clear and coherent system that takes you from beginning through the middle to the end of a fight. Jiu-Jitsu does. There's a sense in which a fighter gets ready for the next fight, whereas the martial artist is more interested in what is the course of my life overall? How will this training influence me as a person? The focus of my coaching is to make something which most people would find pretty scary, mundane. When I first came to America working as a bouncer, about that time, a friend of mine at Columbia University, who was also a graduate student, also in the PhD program, he was like, I've started doing this martial art. It's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So this guy comes in, puts on a VHS tape, and I see this skinny dude in a gi just wrecking people, tackling them, holding them on the ground, strangling them. I'm just like, are you kidding me? I have to learn this.
So George was the first true mixed martial artist.
No one else brought more attention to the sport through that approach. No one else took it to the level of professionalism that he did.
Do you like the term Danaher Death Squad?
No.
And what's the squad look like?
Everything that I'm known for in Jiu-Jitsu is a result of my students. Were it not for them, I would be literally nothing. I'd be some guy tinkering away in a basement. If you're going to do something, try to be the best in the world at it. Get up there and be among the best.
New York City is a great city. Every block, every neighborhood is different. Such a powerful environment.
It's a town, I think, where there's so much opportunity. There's also a lot of pressure. It says you either make it or we're going to go on to the next person.
New York has a mystique that tends to draw the most talented people in the United States and indeed the world to it.
Many of you know I've been practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since 2002. It's an incredible martial art that literally changed my life and in some ways saved my life. But you don't know that it was actually inspired by this man today on the episode, Mr. John Danaher, because he coached a friend of mine in New York City who told me to take up the art back in 2002 when I was really rebuilding my life from nothing. And I actually trained with John back in 2002 in New York City as well. So finally getting to see this man again some 18 years later was incredible. John is a former philosophy student at Columbia University. He was getting his PhD when he met Renzo Gracie in New York and fell in love with this martial art and martial arts in general. And now he's trained some of the best in the business, from Georges Saint Pierre to Matt Serra to Chris Weidman. And he has a completely different way of looking at martial arts, almost from a philosophical standpoint. And he's now gone on to create something called the Danaher Death Squad. These are a small elite group of fighters which focused on leg locks, the bottom half of the body that was ignored for so many years in Jiu-Jitsu. And he's created these beasts, these savages like Gordon Ryan, Nicky Ryan, Garry Tonon, and Nick Rodriguez. They go in there and submit everybody in their trail. And once you sit down and listen to John, you will see why. It's a philosophy of martial arts. I so much treasured this time with John. I think we spoke for almost 3 hours. This man is an incredible guy, a peaceful guy, the spirit of Bushido, it's all in there. And we are really just honored to have this man on this planet teaching martial arts. So sit back, watch this entire thing, pick up Jiu-Jitsu if this intrigues you. And now I leave you, Mr. John Danaher. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is John Danaher, the renowned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and instructor at Renzo Gracie's Academy here in New York City. While studying for your PhD in philosophy at Columbia University, you became fascinated with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu while working nights as a club bouncer. You've gone on to teach and train some of the biggest names in MMA, such as Georges Saint Pierre, Chris Weidman, and Matt Serra. You're the founder of the Danaher Death Squad, an elite group of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialists, including Gordon Ryan, Nick Rodriguez, Garry Tonon, and Nicky Ryan. Today, your squad tours the world, dominating professional competitions, armed with your unique teaching style and leg lock systems. John, welcome to London Real in New York City.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
Great having you here. I guess I wanted to start off, you just got back from Las Vegas, I think. And
It was actually Texas.
it was Texas.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was Houston, wasn't it? And you had Caitlin, one of your students, fighting for a title fairly quick in her career, I think.
Yeah, she's been fighting at amateur level for a very long time. She hasn't worked with me for very long, but she's had many coaches over the course of her career, and started coming in for grappling classes. And I've only been in her corner twice, but she began, I believe, quite a long time ago, fighting in the local New Jersey, New York scene. And she's been in the UFC now for quite a while too, mostly fighting on undercards. But she's just been one of those very consistent performers who just worked and worked and worked. No one really took much notice for a long period of time, and then suddenly she was fighting for a title. So she's had an impressive career.
What's that like to go, I mean, you've done this many times with Georges Saint Pierre and Chris Weidman, and what's that whole process like when you go to the UFC event and you're in the back room in the corner? Are there butterflies? Do you get used to it? Do you have a process?
Yeah, for the coaches, there's not really much in the way of butterflies, since we're not the ones in danger. How the athletes react to it is very, very different. And you see every extreme, from some people who look like they're going for a walk in the park to other people who look like they're getting ready for, a fight to the death. Caitlin is very much the more relaxed, laid-back approach, which is one that I personally favor a lot. I prefer to see athletes treat even the most extreme forms of competition in the most laid-back way possible. I often talk to my athletes about the idea that the ideal is for them to go out into the biggest fight of their life feeling like it's nothing more than another day of sparring in the gym, as though there's nothing exceptional about it. When you look at a professional athlete going into a fight, there's the athlete gets pulled in different directions by different people. The promoters of the event want the athlete to go out thinking this is literally the biggest event of their lives. Like, this is something super normal, which is going to define who they are for the rest of their lives. That's the atmosphere they want.
Because they think that will get the best?
Yeah, that's going to get people pumped up, full of adrenaline, who they're going to come out and bam, first, early knockouts, early submissions. What the promoters are looking for are those precious and very elusive what the fuck moments, where the audience just looks out and goes like, what the fuck just happened? Like, something crazy just happened, but they'll never forget for the rest of their lives.
Just burns it in.
Yeah, that's what they want.
Right.
Now,
and they want the trash talking, hopefully, before.
Yeah, that just builds it up and makes it even better.
Right.
So they're looking for a spectator event, but what's the athlete looking for? Victory.
Yeah.
Okay, so one guy wants a spectacle, the other guy just wants victory. Now, victory can come in many different guises, but the safest ones are the lowest risk methods. So the athlete looks for the lowest risk method of victory, whereas the promoter wants the highest risk. And so they get pulled in two different directions between what the promoter wants on the one hand and what the athlete wants on the other. Now, of course, the coaches go with the athlete. And so somewhere in the middle, you find the compromise that which actually works out. And my thing as a coach is always to downplay the situation, to get athletes thinking, there's nothing exceptional about this. This is just another day at the office for you. The only difference is there's some silly lights and some people in an audience watching you that you don't even know and you won't even see once the lights go on. It's just a cage, just like the one in the gym, same dimensions. There's a person across the cage who you probably haven't fought before in most cases, but all the movements, all the techniques, the strategy will be identical to what you do in the gym. So you get this divergent path between what the promoter wants, where this is something completely abnormal, something exceptional, versus what the athlete and the coaching staff push for. This is completely normal. This is what you do every day, and that's the split.
And there's tension usually between those two, and
yes.
You have to just ride it out.
Yeah.
All right, so you're there to keep the athlete calm and make sure they focus on the win.
In most cases. There are a few athletes who do better psychologically with that idea that this is something different, and they they want to rise to a different kind of occasion. But I think most people perform best when they're at their calmest and most relaxed. Think about something you do every day, driving a car. Do you drive better when your heart is pounding and you're nervous? I don't think most of us do. Most of us do our best work when we're pretty relaxed and pretty calm, and we feel we're doing the same thing that we do every day. Stress is it's a very, very interesting phenomenon. There's some ways in which physiological stress can improve performance, and there's many ways in which it can detract from performance. It's this double-edged sword, which it can do great things for us, and it can do great damage to us. And trying to find that right path between being too relaxed for a fight, where you're just not effective, versus too amped up and becoming clumsy, short of breath, lacking dexterity in your movements, getting tunnel vision. These are all problems that athletes have to deal with. Yeah. And somewhere you've got to find the right compromise between physical excitement and alertness and the destructive side of getting too hyped up for a fight, where you get into adrenaline dumps and tunnel vision, etc.
Can you condition your fighters for those experiences, or is it very hard?
I think the best thing is just experience. You try to get them in there and doing the right thing every time. There are some things you can do for less experienced fighters in terms of building small routines that they go through in the training gym every time they go out to train, and then taking those same routines and employing them before they go out to fight. So for example, they might go through a simple set of routines on how they tie up their gloves, how they put on gloves, how they put on their outfit, jokes and laughter that we run through in the gym and running over them again before they go out to fight. Small psychological cues that create a routine in one place which is familiar, and taking those same routines and employing them in another place which is unfamiliar, so that you take the familiarity of the gym and take it to a new area and hopefully calm the person down in that way.
What about visualization?
I think visualization is a very vague term. It tends to get thrown around like it's an antidote to all problems. To be honest, I've always found once the referee tells you to go forward and fight, all the more esoteric elements of visualization, meditation, and all these things tend to go out the window. It's much more about your physical training preparation. That's what's going to give you the ability to proceed in a satisfactory fashion once the action starts.
Okay. Your Instagram description said living in the spirit of Kaizen, and I was wondering why you have that up there, and is that something you always thought about?
Yes. I'm a huge believer in the idea of small progressive movements towards goals. If you look at the course of an average day that we all go through, every so often, maybe 2 or 3 times in your life, there's one day which changes the direction of your life. But the vast majority of our days are unexceptional. They're just a boring, mundane day. You come home at the end of the day, and if someone asks you, what happened today? You would literally have to think back and be like, I'm not sure. That's probably a description of 95% of our days. So there's a chance in which you could drift through your life where only about 1 to 5% of your days have any real meaning, and that 95% of your life was a waste of time. And that's a tragedy. So we have to be very, very set on this idea that we have to maximize the use of all of our days if we're going to amount to anything in life. And that means at the end of every day, there has to be a concerted look on your part. What was the most significant thing that happened to me today, and how will it influence my life tomorrow? And if we can do this, your days become progressive. Most people live day to day where the events of yesterday have no bearing on the events of today, and the events of today have no bearing on the events of tomorrow. And this means your life will simply run in a flat line. until the day you die. But if we make a concerted effort to build one day upon another, even if it's just a very small thing, and in most cases it will be a small thing. It's rare that we have a day where something monumental happens. Most days are not monumental, they're mundane. So on every one of these mundane days, we have to take one small little gem that happened. It may not be very big, something small, and add that to your performance tomorrow. And if we can do this over 10 years, something truly remarkable can happen. It's so easy just to let a day go and they say, I'll try again tomorrow. But until we get a sense of one day building upon another towards a goal, you'll never achieve anything. You'll just melt on, and 10 years will go by and you'll look back and say, what do I do? And what did I do? And there may not be anything significant behind you.
So be intentional about doing something that's going to make your life better.
Yeah,
and that
the whole notion of Kaizen is this crystallizes this idea that if I can improve my performance in any given area of my life by even a very small percentage point, and then add day by day, you get this compounding interest effect where at the end of 5 years, something quite remarkable may have happened. You may have literally reinvented yourself in 5 years. You may have an entirely new skill set, which you didn't have previously. And so it's up to us to do this, because the natural tendency is for days just to run into each other until by the end of the week you're looking back and say, what happened this week? I don't know, like, it's just gone. It's so easy to let that happen. There's so many distractions in life. There's so many things looking to grab your attention that you can lose a day, a week, a month, and even a year, even a decade. And it's up to us to ask, okay, well, what was significant and how is it going to be built into my life tomorrow? And how does this relate to the goals that I have? And if you can do this, this is the basic idea behind Kaizen. And you can do remarkable things, and you can reinvent yourself many times over the period of your life. It's my belief that it takes around 5 years of full-time training to develop world-class skills in most athletic endeavors. There are many, many examples of people beginning training and somewhere between 5 to 7 years after the onset of their training, competing at the highest levels of their given sport and getting within the top 5 athletes in the world. There are many, many examples of this. That's a clear signal that it takes around 5 to 7 years of full-time training to get to world-class level in sports. You could extend that into other areas of life. You can become, in the same time it takes you to win an Olympic bronze medal, you could have become an outstanding day trader. So think about it, 5 years is not a long time. That means we all have within us this ability to reinvent ourselves many times in the course of our life. If you start off at 20 years old, there's a lot of opportunities for you to change and adapt over the course of your life.
If you're intentional every day.
If you're
Does that mean getting uncomfortable or doing something fearful?
To be honest, I'm not going to say these things don't have value, but there's not really a need to go out there and do things that you're terrified of. Right? Most of it works on a pretty mundane level, where you just identify goals and you say, okay, what is required for me to get to those goals? I very much try in the training room to take the terror out of combat sports. Like when you think about it, combat sports are a crazy thing. We're in the business of strangling people and breaking limbs. Okay, now on the face of it, that's a horrible thing. But when you just break it down and dissect skills into manageable components and train them at a level where nothing overwhelms you, you can get really good in a comparatively short period of time. And at no point were you ever thinking, my God, this is terrifying. It's just mundane daily training. The focus of my coaching is to make something which most people would find pretty scary, a guy on top of you squeezing your neck, and make it fairly mundane, is to take the scariness and the terror out of the equation rather than to put it in.
And that's kind of a fundamental of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and maybe we'll get into that, to its practices. You write these posts on Instagram which is kind of embodying a lot of the philosophy you just talked about now. Are you surprised by how voraciously these things are read and consumed by people out there? Because I think a lot of the men and women in the sport, they've never heard someone talk about the philosophy of it the same way you have.
From what I understand in the comment section, I put a lot of people to sleep. So
I don't know about that.
I don't know how ferociously they're read, but I'm always very grateful that people are interested in what we do. We do have a slightly different approach to teaching the sport, and I'm always very grateful that people are interested and that they follow what my athletes do and saying this is an effective way of playing the game.
And when you get put on, major television shows like Billions, do you just take that with a grain of salt as well?
That was just a comedy to me. I'm the worst actor in the entire universe, so for me to work next to those guys is just amusing.
But these are signs that you're being appreciated and your work is being appreciated.
Thank you. That's nice of you to say.
So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. In 2001, I had a horrible year in New York City after kind of 8 years in and out of this city.
In what sense was it horrible? Professionally or personally?
Everything. I found that I wasn't ready for this city and my vices got the best of me. So my kind of alcoholism worked its way into a drug habit, into a heroin overdose, into my girlfriend leaving me and my best friend from MIT firing me from the company that he had hired me for. Then 9/11 happened, and it was probably one of the worst years of my life.
Were you personally affected by 9/11?
I knew a couple people that died in the top floors.
Yeah, I was going to say you were in the financial.
I was in the dot-com space kind of at the time, so I was out of there. But it was just the whole malaise of the place was just this real dark hole. And so I went to London to get the hell out of Dodge, and it ended up being a great thing. But
why did you choose London?
Well, I had actually spent 2 years there earlier in the financial markets, and so it was the only place I knew that I might be able to get a job. And I just thought, I can't be in this city anymore, and I've got to go somewhere. Now, a lot of guys in AA will say you can't run away from a problem, but for me, it actually worked. And I started kind of my recovery on January 2nd, 2002. And one of my good friends from New York City called me in June and said, Brian, you should try Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I had never done martial arts before. Actually, I had wrestled 1 year in high school and gone from a nerdy kid.
How did you react to wrestling in high school?
Oh my God,
Did you like it?
I lost every single match, but something I liked about it. Maybe it was the challenge, but being dominated by another person I guess I got more comfortable with it, but it's a very shocking thing to feel. I remember there was someone that was doing, I think they call it a Saturday night ride in wrestling, where I was at some school in their territory and a guy is locked on top of you, right? You know what I'm talking about.
That's the most embarrassing thing that can happen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't win in competition. I didn't have the mindset, and I was a science geek before that. And I went from this skinny guy to I got kind of big, and that was my experience. And so when this guy called me up and said, you got to try jiu-jitsu, I Googled it in London. Google, I think, was barely around.
Yeah,
and I found someone who had trained with Renzo Gracie in the past, and we started training without a gi. And
now, not only did you start training with the greatest jiu-jitsu player of all time, but given the timeline, you started when Roger started, because Roger had only just left for London at that time.
Right.
So you, not only did you train with Roger Gracie, but you were probably one of his first students at that point.
Yeah, well, I trained with someone who I actually helped him set up, build the studio, I think, there. We trained at a gym called the Third Space, which I think Mauricio, his father, used to train at.
Because his father had been there before Roger. Yeah.
And so I was training there, and I found a South African guy who knew him, and we just
There's always a South African guy
right?
in London. There's always a Kiwi, an Australian, and a South African guy. You can just guarantee it. London has never changed. Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. And it completely transformed my life. I was trying to get my life together. I was coming off the drugs, but I didn't have anything to focus on. I didn't have a way to get my body.
Do you mind if I ask you, did your drugs follow you from New York to London, or you?
They strangely didn't, and it doesn't make sense, especially for an opiate like heroin. People say that can't happen, but I think things had fallen so low in my life that I got a message on a deep subconscious level that if you continue this, you will have nothing, because everyone I was ever close to didn't want anything to do with me. And I always say it was the right decision, because you can't follow someone down that hole. And they actually, in some ways, saved my life by giving me that message of, it's not okay with your behavior. The girlfriend's gonna leave me, my best friend's gonna sack me. And my body was shutting down. So I stopped doing the drugs there, but I needed something else, and jiu-jitsu became that. So I trained every week, and I stayed away from New York City for that whole year, and I came back at the end of 2002, and my buddy that told me about jiu-jitsu said, Brian, if you're coming back, then we're gonna go train at my dojo. And he took me, and we rolled, the three of us. And it was Dan Lepanto. I don't know if you know Dan and his brother Rob.
Yes, I know him well, yeah.
The bald-headed, I think Renzo used to call them the Aryan brothers. And so we went to the old Renzo Gracie place on 8th Ave and 36th or 37th
Oh yeah, that was one hell of a gig.
It was above the methadone clinic. The locker room, there wasn't a locker room. It was like,
you must have been freaking out because everyone there's a heroin addict.
And, around there, yeah. Well, I was a year out, so I was okay. But it was crazy, and I remember we rolled. I think you started me from side control, and you kept telling me to chill out. I think I was really tense and really nervous. And so that was the first time I met you, and it was Dan Lepanto, who I think you gave his purple belt later, that actually got me to do this. And I went on and trained for 8 more years of my life and got into Thai boxing and all sorts of other things. So
that's an amazing story.
It is. So in some way, you actually helped me recover, unbeknownst to you. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Dan was obviously really smitten with you, and him and Rob, and you changed.
They were amazing kids. I love those kids. Yeah.
The hardcore. So what was the scene like back in 2002? Because there was no glamour, there was no Hollywood television shows.
It goes back further than that. My teacher, Renzo Gracie, came to America in 1995-96. And you got to remember that outside of people pretty heavily involved in martial arts, no one knew what jiu-jitsu was. Like I grew up in New Zealand. I did martial arts as a teenager, loved it.
What kind of martial arts?
All striking martial arts, mostly boxing and Muay Thai.
Okay.
And the idea that grappling could be an effective fighting style was just not even a consideration. It was we didn't even have wrestling in New Zealand, and wrestling was something I would see every 4 years at the Olympics, and people would look at that, what the hell are these guys doing? That's just gay as hell.
The singlets. And everything,
like, this is crazy. And just turn the channel, wait till a real sport came on, like decathlon or something like that. And
it's also not manly to fight down that way.
It was all stand.
Stand
if someone went down, they stood up and you fought again.
Very Queensberry.
And, and it was all Marquis of Queensberry. And there was judo, but judo was not a strong martial art in New Zealand at all. And it was always seen as like a sport that wouldn't work in a fight. A judo guy grabbed you, just knock him out, it'd be easy. And so there was this very dismissive attitude that ran not just in New Zealand, but I believe across pretty much most of the world, that when it came to fighting, it was all about striking. Like when I grew up in the 80s, there was no doubt whatsoever that the greatest fighter in the world was Mike Tyson. Okay, when someone asked you, who's the best fighter in the world? Easy, Mike Tyson, because he was a striker. If someone had told you that there were a group of dudes living in Brazil somewhere who would have a pretty good chance of beating him, and in a way which might be kind of embarrassing for even Mike Tyson, you would have just laughed. Were they going to tackle him, hold him down? Are you kidding me? I would have laughed at you. And when I first came to America working as a bouncer, I started working with wrestlers and judo players. They weren't all wrestlers and judo players, but some of them were. And I noticed very quickly that they were extremely effective in fighting. And this was a big shock to me. I said, man, these guys are good.
They can control the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. We had to, hit people, and the cops would come in, people would be bleeding, and my hands would be busted. I had to go and teach at Columbia with broken hands. It's crazy. So
why were you working door? Was this the adventurous side of Danaher?
I had a full financial scholarship when I arrived at Columbia, and I think I blew it on booze and women in like 2 weeks. So there was time for me to get a job. One night I was working down Amsterdam Avenue, and I saw an older gentleman being beaten quite soundly by a much younger, larger, more aggressive young guy. And I thought to myself, it's terrible. No one's helping this guy. And this big thug, young thug, is manhandling this older gentleman. So I ran up, I grabbed the young guy and picked him up and threw him down the street and shoved him down towards down the avenue. And I came back, and the old guy gets up and thanks me, he goes, who are you? And I said, I'm I'm John from New Zealand. And he goes, you want a job? And I go, sure. And he goes, why don't you work at my nightclub? He was the owner of the club. And he had, unbeknownst to me, he was a complete douchebag. He fully deserved the beating he got from the young guy, but I didn't find that out until later. But I ended up working, and then you meet other bouncers. They see you do work, and they say, hey, come work at this club. And before you know it, I was working all over Manhattan. And
did you enjoy it as well?
oh yeah, of course.
Because it was exciting.
I never do anything that I don't enjoy. If something's unenjoyable, don't do it. Life is short. Life is fragile. Don't ruin your life doing things you don't enjoy. And I loved philosophy. Nightclub work was an adventure for me. Sometimes a scary adventure, but always an adventure. And
would you test yourself mentally in those situations?
It's not even a question of mental. It's always physical.
Physical.
Yeah.
Okay.
People tend to look upon the mental theory. Most altercations are purely physical, and physical solutions for physical problems.
And the girls love the bouncers. And you're sober at the end of the night, which makes it easy. Am I giving away all the trade secrets?
Yeah.
That's what I've heard.
Let's just say that the people I worked with did much better in that regard than I did. I was never the playboy type, but I had some guys I worked with who were legends. And but yeah, it was a fun adventure. I enjoyed it.
And so you started noticing that there was something to
these
stand-up
guys,
grappling guys.
They were very, very effective, and it was shocking to me because I'd always thought these people would be the least effective people in fighting. They turned out they were the most effective. Not only were they the most effective, they were most effective in ways that I couldn't even comprehend. They could hold and control people as opposed to just knock them out. When you're striking, there's no gentle knockouts. There are more gentle knockouts, but there's no gentle knockout. You've got to summon up a certain amount of kinetic energy to put someone to sleep. Whereas these guys could just hold people, immobilize them. They could pin them, and in extreme cases, they could just pick them up and drop them on their head and do severe damage, much more damage than I could ever do with a punch or a kick. So to me, this was fascinating. So after work, I would always bug them with questions, like, show me this, that takedown thing you do. And they would show me stuff. But of course, that's not a real way to learn and understand. You get tricks, but you don't get training. There's a big difference. And then coincidentally, about that time, a friend of mine at Columbia University, who was also a graduate student, also in the PhD program, and he finished the PhD program. Now he's a very successful lecturer down in Australia. He said, John, I know you work at night as a bouncer. He goes, I've started doing this martial art. It's called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's a grappling style. And I was like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, Jiu-Jitsu is Japanese. Like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And he goes, yeah, it's like wrestling, but instead of pinning people, you get them in these things called submission holds. And I was like, interesting. That night, I went to work, and a bouncer I was working with started talking about this thing called a UFC. And he said there's these crazy Brazilian wrestlers who win everything. They're just killers. They look like nothing, but they're killers. And I thought, twice in one day I've heard about this. Maybe this is a sign.
And you hadn't been watching the UFC?
No.
It'd been around for maybe a couple of years.
Yeah, it had been around for a while.
Okay.
So,
which was all videotapes.
Yes, you had old VHS tapes in those days. So this guy comes in and puts on a VHS tape, and I see this skinny dude in a gi just wrecking people, tackling them, holding them on the ground, strangling. I'm just like, are you kidding me?
Did you believe it even?
Yeah, I was like, you can tell when a fight's fake. This is not fake. These guys are going. You're seeing they're hit and then blood come in. That's not fake. You can't fake that way. Yeah. And so I'm thinking, damn, this is good. These guys are, and what I was seeing in the cage was so similar to what you would see in nightclub fighting. An initial closing of distance, an impact, a clinch, a fall, and one guy on top, one guy on bottom. Normally in a street fight, guy on top invariably wins, but here in the cage, these guys were falling apart and still winning. And to me, this was just fascinating. So when my friend at Columbia came in the next day, I had my office hours, and I just finished office hours, and we're in the old philosophy hall upstairs on the 7th floor. And he goes like, I've been training now 2 weeks. Now, he was a small man, 140 pounds. At the time, I was around 220 pounds. And
that's big.
And that's a big size difference. And, he had literally never been in a fight in his life. And I had been bouncing for many years in New Zealand and the United States, and I've been in a lot of fights. And he goes like, we start down on the ground, and the main grappling move that I had from the judo and wrestling players that I worked with was essentially a sag headlock throw into a kesugatame type hold on the ground. Okay. That was what I used to use. And
arm around the head.
Yeah, and just crank up, and they couldn't breathe, and people would give up and quit. So I put him in my best kesugatame, and I held him down with all my might. And we're on the wooden floor in the philosophy department office with people walking
Good
past.
Times in Columbia. Crazy people there.
I'm pretty sure that's not what the founders of that university envisioned for their future students. But I held him down as best I could, and as I was holding him, he started slipping around behind me. He started getting a foot inside, and I didn't know the first thing about grappling, but I could feel this was not good. This guy was going to my back. And everyone knows that's not a good thing in a fight, guy getting behind you. And after about 2 minutes, my arms were getting tired. I was holding this guy and grunting and doing my best, and I was unable to control him. When suddenly his head popped out like a champagne cork, and he just slipped around behind me, and I had to scramble back up to my feet and get away from him. And then as I got up, I thought, like, this shouldn't be happening. I'm twice this guy's size. I'm twice as strong as him. I'm tired, and he's fine. And if we had to fight a second time, who's to say he wouldn't get behind me and strangle me next time? And that was it. I was like, dude, I've got to, 2 weeks? You've been training 2 weeks, and you did just fine against a guy twice your size and strength. I have to learn this. So I went down and did my first class. And my first class is probably pretty much the same as your first class too. I got strangled and arm locked by everybody in the room. And I came out thinking, like, I'm gonna have to learn this to some degree. I can't go through life being completely ignorant of what is happening here. I didn't say I want to be good at this, but I have to be competent at it. And
was that at Renzo's, that first class?
No, Renzo had an assistant called Craig Kukak in those days, who was the first teacher. And then Renzo came, they worked together for a period of time, and they went their separate ways. In those early days, there were some people that you would recognize. Matt Serra was a blue belt back then. Wow. I think there were only 2 purple belts in the whole East Coast of the United States. Matt was there. There's some other people you probably wouldn't remember, but those were early days. And to even, you just didn't see a black belt in those days. They were like unicorns. And a purple belt was considered to be like a god on the mat. A blue belt was like a serious force, like a demigod. And we were all white belts. And so I started learning, and it was a fascinating sport. My first ambitions were just to get competent at the sport and help me for bouncing. And I must say, you often hear people criticize jiu-jitsu as unrealistic for street fighting. And they'll say, you can't use that in a fight. Let me tell you, that's bullshit. Jiu-jitsu was extremely effective in street fighting. It made my life as a bouncer massively easier than it was before.
What were your go-to moves? Guillotines and
anything that got me behind people and quickly on the ground. And of course, strangleholds are the number one method. If things got completely out of hand, you would strangle them. Right. And I must say, I had many people come back to clubs that I worked in days or weeks later and say, like, hey, I'm really thankful that you choked me out and you didn't hit me. Like, my face is fine. I acted like an asshole. Like, thank you for being nice. And it gave you, even the most extreme circumstances where people were completely out of hand, a stranglehold is like an off switch for human beings, and it just completely pacified the situation. Of course, in most situations, you didn't have to strangle people. You just pin them or immobilize them. And most people don't really want to fight that badly. There were exceptions to that. There are certain kinds of crowds that you can work in a club which have a much higher propensity towards violence. But your average Joe is really looking to blow off some steam in a fight. And you don't have to go all the way to strangling them unconscious. But there are a few cases where this has to be done. And the result is bloodless. Even someone who under normal circumstances is probably severely beaten by bouncers can just be completely pacified with a stranglehold and the situation taken down and made manageable. So yeah, jiu-jitsu was a remarkably effective thing.
So you were hooked?
Yeah, absolutely. But still hooked in a very superficial way.
Yeah.
Okay, it was something which has made my life much easier, but my ambition in life was still to be a university professor who happened to be a bouncer during his graduate school years. So I just saw jiu-jitsu as like this fascinating, fun activity that made my life significantly easier. And that started to change when a number of factors came in. First, Renzo Gracie wanted to write a book on jiu-jitsu. And I think at the time, this is around 1998, 1999, I think I was like either a blue or purple belt, I can't remember which. And Renzo said, I want to write a book on jiu-jitsu. John, can you write it for me? And I was like, dude, I'm a blue belt. Like, yeah, how am I going to write a book about jiu-jitsu? And he said, well, you're
the only guy in college.
Yeah, he goes, you're the only one that can write. So I'm like, okay. So Renzo said, come to class more, I'll teach you more. So I would come down to class much more often. As soon as I was done teaching at Columbia, I would come down. Then I would have to go out and bounce at night and until 4 a.m, and then go and teach at Columbia. It was like this crazy cycle.
Wow.
And Renzo really took me under his wing, and he's a superb teacher, by the way. He never gets credit for his teaching ability. People see Renzo as a very charismatic guy, but he's a damn good teacher, damn good.
How would you describe Renzo?
One of the most affable, charismatic human beings I ever met. If Renzo wanted to be a politician, he would have he would have won every election he was ever in by a freaking landslide.
And game for a fight,
yeah,
willing to put it on the line in the street and in the ring.
That too, yeah.
Which is a credible combination.
Yeah, you don't see that very often, like fighter and charismatic leader. You don't. Yeah. That's a very, very rare combination.
And fought fighting champions.
Yeah. He fought always way above his weight, like crazy. Like he should have been fighting at 145 his whole career. That's his actual weight, but he always fought at like middleweight. You crazy? But
and he's a good teacher as well.
Very good. And so he did a fine job of saying, okay, John, here's what you need to know. And
because the classic Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu teaching isn't always highly regarded. Like I went down to Gracie Barra in Rio, and it's like, you run around the mat, I'm going to show you a move, go spar. I mean, it's not known for a specific curriculum, which I know later, changed with what you were doing and, the guys in Torrance, California.
That's definitely an issue, yeah.
Is that kind of a decent way to describe the way?
It was, the methodologies of teaching are pretty primitive.
Right. The transfer of knowledge wasn't the best.
Especially in those days.
Right. The knowledge itself was incredible, but only held probably by some very high-level black belts.
And the assumption in most schools was that the people who were very good got special attention, and everyone else just came in and learned a move a day. Okay. And for most people, that's fine. You learn a move a day, you do that for a year, you'll beat any regular Joe in a fight. No questions asked. Kaizen, and a small-scale Kaizen. And so I started learning a lot more, and I began writing. I wrote Renzo's original book basically in nightclubs. I'd be bouncing all night, and I would have pen and pad with me, and in between fighting people, I'd be writing ideas, and then I would transcribe them on a typewriter, and then send completed documents to California, where the editors would start to put together the book. So my knowledge was starting to increase about this time, and my interest started to increase. And a short time after that, Renzo started saying, "Listen, John, I'm fighting a lot, and my students, Matt Serra, Ricardo Almeida, and Rodrigo Gracie are leaving. They're going to open their own schools. You're going to have to teach." And I was like, okay, I'm nowhere near as good as any one of those three guys. They were the guys who taught me, and all three of them were world champions. And I was like, Renzo, I'm not qualified to teach, man. And he's got, you got to do it. There's no one else. So
could you say no to him at that point or not?
Oh yeah, of course you can always say no.
But I mean,
but I wouldn't, because he's a friend, you know. And I was just like, whoa, I got to get better. Like this is, I can't. I would be so humiliated if the quality of the school went from here to here on my watch. Like, you know, people were used to, like, you know, Matt Serra, he's a legend, like Ricardo Almeida, Rodrigo Gracie. Like, these are, at that time, they were winning ADCC, they were the best there was. And I imagine if the school that I was a part of just dropped in quality, because now, oh yeah, Danaher is teaching. Like, great. And so I was like, I got to get better at this. And so I was thinking to myself, you know, where do you want to go with this? And I had pretty much finished my PhD requirements. I was getting very close to finishing the PhD. And part of me was like, you know, do you want to go the academic route? Like, what does that entail? Okay, I defend my dissertation. Then I'm probably going to have to go to some small college somewhere in the Midwest of the United States, live a boring life for 20 years, scrounge up enough money through grants to live a life, and then hope that maybe when I'm 40, 45, write enough journals that maybe I can get accepted to a good university in a nice place, and then when I'm 50, teach it in a cool school. And I'm thinking, I don't want to live that life. Like, you know, there's got to be a better way to live your life.
But that means walking away from philosophy as a life. Or, well,
then I asked myself, what do you really love? And I said, I loved philosophy, but I didn't love academia. And around that time, the whole kind of political correctness movement was getting strong in university, and I never gelled with that. It wasn't my thing. And
why not?
It cuts a little too close to talk about publicly, but I was saying, I don't want to live my life in an institution where you could see the trend in academia was going that way. And I was on the early end of political correctness and didn't like it. And the idea of just staying silent, listening to people say things that I vehemently disagreed with, and having to keep quiet while, for the sake of not ruffling feathers and keeping your job and getting tenure, and didn't appeal to me. And I loved the hurly-burly freedom of jiu-jitsu. Like, it was a school where people said whatever the fuck they want. And the only thing you were measured by was merit. It was just how good were you on the mat. And you could have every kind of defect, but if you were good on the mat, you could be forgiven. And the bonds of friendship there were much more real and genuine than they were in the academic lifestyle. And then the deciding factor was around that time, a young Canadian came in to train. His name was Georges Saint Pierre. And he didn't speak much English at that time. And came in and he started doing a few introductory classes that I was teaching. And one day he said, I'm fighting in these local competitions in Canada. He showed me some videotape, VHS, of his fights, and I was like, this kid's really doing some amazing work. Like, now, you must understand that MMA was changing around this time. When I first started, Jiu-Jitsu was the king of mixed martial arts. It wasn't even called MMA, it was called Vale Tudo or NHB. And Jiu-Jitsu was the undisputed king.
Yeah, dominated all the UFCs, the early ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, around the early UFCs, you could tell who would win by the introductions. Whenever they said grappler, you're like, oh, he's got to win. Mm. And if it was two grapplers, then you always knew it was the jiu-jitsu guy. And if you guessed along those lines, you'd be right in like 95% of cases. So things started to change when the skills of grappling got more widely disseminated, and then suddenly striking became more important. And in particular, American wrestlers started coming in large numbers, and they'd learned enough jiu-jitsu to shut down jiu-jitsu and control where the fight took place. And then kickboxers started to learn enough takedown defense and enough submission defense that they could bring the techniques of kickboxing in. And so you had these weird cycles where jiu-jitsu started as king and then went down. Wrestling came in, became king, and then
ground and pound.
And then kickboxing came in and became king. And there were these cycles of which martial art is best. But all that was leading towards this idea that the real truth wasn't that any one martial art was king, but rather that the skills of all the martial arts synthesized would be king. And that there would be a day in the future where we really stopped talking about style versus style and started talking about athlete versus athlete. And I remember looking at this VHS of Georges Saint Pierre and saying, that's exactly what this kid is. This kid's the future. Like, he's not a jiu-jitsu player, he's not a wrestler, he's not a kickboxer. He's the average of those three things. And I remember just going home that night, working in a club, saying, like, this kid's doing something really, really interesting. He's the face of a new kind of martial art. Like, mixed martial arts is different from its components, and something revolutionary is happening here.
What year is this, roughly?
This is early 2000s.
2002 or something. Like
Yeah.
The book hadn't come out yet. That was 2003.
No, I believe it was published in 2003.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but I believe so.
Yeah.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.